So thank you all for staying for this and for attending the symposium with this panel discussion, which is titled The Agri-Food Industry Across the Three Regions, Israel, the UAE, and Missouri. We're going to be talking about the overall agricultural systems, agri-food systems, and structures in the three regions, three very different regions coming from different places historically. We're going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities in the respective agri-food systems in the three regions, as well as some of the factors that are driving change for growers, food producers, and ultimately consumers. So I'm Jim Carrington, President and CEO of the Danforth Plant Science Center. We have three very interesting, diverse guests on this panel. Let me introduce them. First, beaming in, we're very happy to have Michal Levy, Chief Scientist in the Israel Ministry of Agriculture. We're happy to have, again, following on from the first session, Saud Al-Nawais, Commercial Counselor, Embassy of the United Arab Emirates. Thank you so much. And finally, immediately to my right, Garrett Hawkins, President of the Missouri Farm Bureau. Thank you all so much for being here. As I'm introducing you, it's really striking, and I'm looking forward to this because of the different perspectives, the different backgrounds of each of you, the different constituencies that you represent, and how we're all going to come together to address some of these big global challenges, migrating our agriculture to be, and we'll never get there, we will always be migrating to be more climate smart, and excited to see how our thoughts align and how they diverge in terms of how we get to where we're going. So thank you all for being here. Let me start by asking each of you, and perhaps we can start with Michal. Let's give an orientation, an overall orientation of the agricultural systems, the agri-food structures in Israel, the UAE, and Missouri. Michal, orient our audience to what's going on in Israel.
Okay, hi everyone, and I'm sorry that I wasn't be able to join you physically there in St. Louis, but maybe next time. So I think that all of us aware and know that we are currently in the fourth agricultural revolution. And when I'm talking about the fourth agricultural revolution, I'm referring to the revolution of implementation of technology into agriculture. We're talking about robotics, image processing, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and much more. And but when we look about the change during this time, because this is not something that is new, I think we can already dissect it to three generations. So the first generation that I'm referring to inside the fourth agricultural revolution is basically what we used to call the precision agriculture. This was based on GPS and basically gave the growers, the farmers, the advantage to improve the efficiency of the work that is done in the farm. Then we moved to what is looked like the second generation, which is more like the digital farming. At that period of time, we started to see sensors and other devices that supported the work of the grower in order to help him to make decisions, but this time based on actual data that was collected from his farm. And I think that today we are already in the third generation of the fourth technological agricultural revolution, which is when we started to demonstrate sustainability. I think that at this stage, all of us, also growers, understand that what that is being done in the borders of the farm have implications on the environment, have implications on the surrounding of the farm. And now we are much more concerned about the planet and how we use this technology to practice good agriculture, quality agriculture, one that give a higher yield, but also is very sustainable and concerned about the surrounding and the planet. And when we move, to Israel and what's going on here, I think that the way we try to improve our agriculture, practicing agriculture, is by having a good input and output between all the stakeholders that are doing something around agriculture. I'm talking about developing technology, about private sector, of course. I'm talking about researchers, how to promote agriculture using research or new methods. I'm talking about our extension services, which is basically a government unit that is working very close with our growers in order to bring them and teach them new technologies, to use new protocols, to use new varieties, how to practice better agriculture. And of course, get all the inputs and feedback from our growers. What are the challenges? How can we support? How can we help? What are the good programs that they need in order to promote their farms, and more. And basically, I'm proud to say that we have in Israel a very successful ecosystem, which starts with our universities and research institutes. We have in Israel also governmental research institutes related specifically to agriculture, the Vulcani Center, which is doing very much applicative research that is very close to the growers. We have in Israel different governmental entities, ministries, and also others to support the development of this ecosystem. We have the Israel Innovation Authority. We also support in community to create this ecosystem, and other entities. Of course, we have in Israel VCs, local VCs that are relatively small, but doing a very high impact on entrepreneurship and in general, the ecosystem. And of course, we have the presence of a lot of the multinationals, companies that have sometimes R&D centers, sometimes they have just representatives to see how they can collaborate, how they can work together with researchers, entrepreneurs, and other in order to promote global challenges. And we see much more today, more VCs that some of them are already global and entering the field of agriculture. And on top of all that, we have the Israeli DNA, which is sometimes it's advantage, but sometimes not so much, of being very much direct and approaching people and start working together in order to promote different challenges. And by this slide, I want to show you how in the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, we try to have programs related to each part of this route of bringing new technology from the idea till the implementation. I won't go on all the programs, but we do have funding opportunities for each one of these steps. Sometimes it's with in a collaboration with other ministries or other governmental entities. And this slide actually makes me very proud to show that since 2014, we see increase in investment in agri-food companies, startups in Israel. And actually 2021 was very impressive. And I don't have yet the full data for 2022, but it looks very good, and we're very proud. We actually believe that all the ecosystem that we are investing in actually bring fruits. And here it's a scheme. It's actually, it's not very much updated, but I like the way it's presented, because you can see that in Israel, we have startups related to all relatively work that is done around the farm. And I think that this is basically present the Israeli agriculture that is not, don't have any strength in one topic of agriculture, but actually present the whole agricultural work. Plants, working post-harvest animals, dairy, and etc., and also new methods of growing food and water treatment and much more. And here I think that I also will go fast here, but the idea is that in order to bring the next success, we have to combine forces between the field people, between the people that actually practice agriculture, and the technological people, in order to bring much faster the solutions to do better agriculture. And my last slide, I want to show you that the government of Israel just announced what are the top 5 topics of national priority. And I'm very proud to say, as someone that worked in the Ministry of Agriculture, that you can see that agriculture is actually related to all 5 topics in a sense. So if we are talking about the future and where we see agriculture, and we didn't start to talk about food security and global and climate change that of course relate to agriculture and are concerned to the whole world, but this is basically put agriculture in a very important place. When we talk about research, when we talk about investment and work that needs to be done by governments, and of course has to be done in collaboration between countries, between governments, between researchers, because the problems that are local, that Israel faced and the UAE and the USA, they are everyone's problems. So thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, we'll peel back some of the areas that you just talked about. So tell us about the agricultural economy in the UAE.
Sure. Thank you very much. In order to understand that, you need to understand a little bit of economic history. So the place that we now refer to as the United Arab Emirates, less than a century ago, our main income for the country was the pearl diving industry. So these are precious pearls that divers would dive, pick from the bottom of the sea, and then sell them off to manufacturers in Europe and elsewhere. This is pre-60s, pre-65, 40s and 50s. What happened was a young Japanese entrepreneur in Japan came up with the concept of cultured pearls. So being able to culture these pearls in labs. So that's a fantastic sort of example of how technology can literally disrupt an entire industry. That was our first financial crisis. And so fast forward 10 years later, 1970s, we were blessed obviously with the discovery of oil. And because we've learned from that painful experience of the pearl diving industry, we decided to use oil as a means to an end. So one, we don't produce electricity from burning crude. We produce electricity in the UAE from solar panels, from nuclear energy. Obviously, there's the waste problem, but that's a problem that we can't solve on our own. But also from natural gas. We produce water from desalination plants. And then in tandem with the pearl diving industry and the income we generated, we had modest agriculture. And the reason I say modest agriculture back then was because there were several challenges that we had to face. One, very low rainfall, very high temperature, lack of waterways, poor soil. These were all issues that we were facing back then, which made us say, yeah, we have modest income from agriculture. 80% of our food requirement is still imported. And the sad part is, which we're trying to solve right now immediately, is that 1/3 of that food goes to waste. So that's actually the biggest problem we have today in the UAE. The agricultural activity today in the UAE is governed by 160,000 hectares. There's incentives from the government, just like any other government. The incentives are mostly subsidizing seed, fertilizers, pesticides, as well as giving out competitive loans to farmers to basically be able to buy machinery. The new technology that's now in the UAE, hydroponics, aeroponics, vertical and smart farming, that's all now in the UAE. We've really seen sort of the rise of the private sector in the UAE trying to produce locally. Obviously, the pandemic, we had to learn the hard way. So we have a couple of companies there. We have Barakat and Silal. I believe they were supposed to be in today's symposium. They were unable to make it. Really working on creating efficient distribution systems to be able to basically distribute and transport farm goods directly to F&B concepts, restaurants, hotels, etc., to the end consumer. We have a ministry of climate change that is run by a young, dynamic female cabinet minister. She oversees the food security portfolio. The ability to work with other countries to learn and be able to import the know-how and the latest technologies. Again, I think in the first panel I mentioned gene editing tools, which can also be applied to agricultural products as well. And then at the heart of everything we're doing is our national strategy, which I'll be talking about in a bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Garrett, you represent a lot of growers here in the state of Missouri. What does agriculture in the state look like from your perspective?
Well, Jim, thank you first to you and your team, to the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center for hosting the symposium and working with BioSTL. We at the Farm Bureau developed such a strong relationship with BioSTL and appreciate what they are doing. You know, truly, as we sit here today, for folks who are streaming around the world, you're missing out for being in the epicenter, truly, of the ag tech revolution that's happening in the United States. And it truly is humbling, just as a small town boy and a farmer, now serving as president of the Farm Bureau, to be able to be a part of this discussion as we talk about, you know, agri-food innovation between the three countries. Truly, as a farmer here in the United States, we recognize that 96% of the consumers live somewhere besides here. And so hearing these conversations, it truly is music to my ears when you talk about you being a foodie, Saud, because we as farmers want to connect with foodies and offer truly the bounty of what we produce here. Missouri, as you know, just geographically is truly at the cross-section of the nation, and we are one of the more diverse states when it comes to agricultural production. So as a whole, production agriculture, as well as value-added processing contributes about $95 billion to Missouri's economy on an annual basis. And the backbone of that is the 95,000 farms that we have here in the state. So only Texas, you hear the old adage that everything's bigger in Texas. Well, okay, Texas has us there in terms of number of farms, but Missouri is number 2. And as we think about and look at just types of production, if we can advance slides, I've just got a glimpse here in terms of where we rank nationally just in terms of traditional agriculture. So if we scroll forward yet again. So again, I've covered $94 billion economic contribution. About $55 billion of that is in production ag, so my fellow farmers and me, what we do. Then another $35 billion in the value-added processing that happens beyond the farm gate. We support jobs to the tune of about 450,000 here in the state and contribute $31 billion in household income. And again, only Texas.
By the way, too bad about that Texas stat.
I know.
You hate to see
it's
that.
It's tough. So here's just a glimpse. I think it's important just to, Missouri, as you think about the state, we are truly where the southern agriculture and Midwest agriculture meet. And within the Farm Bureau, Jim, you noted, so Missouri Farm Bureau, we represent 147,000 member families. Actually, the Farm Bureau movement was born here in Missouri in 1915. We became the first state Farm Bureau, and then ultimately in 1919, the American Farm Bureau was founded. And today, we're the nation's largest farm organization as well as the world's largest farm organization. And our membership represents the diversity of agriculture, from small operators who are doing truck farming and farmers markets all the way to large-scale row crop and animal ag. So if we can scroll forward one more time. So just keep clicking through, and it really is, for our audience, just to get a glimpse of where we fall in the mix. So when I say that we're at the cross-section of the nation, we're also kind of at the cross-section when you think of traditional agriculture, a leading hay and forage state, as well as a beef cattle state. I'm a cattleman myself. I'm the 3rd generation to live and operate on the farm that we have today, the 5th generation overall in my family to raise beef cattle. We're also in the Missouri Delta, in the Boot Hill of Missouri, southeast. We raise rice. We're also a major producer of goats, which a lot of people are surprised by, but some pretty significant goat markets in the southern and south central parts of the state. Turkeys, as well as broiler chickens, layers, soybeans, hogs, cotton. The late Congressman Bill Emerson always used to say the only things that we don't do in Missouri are citrus and sugar. And in many ways, that is correct. So truly, again, you look at these rankings in traditional agriculture, and I have members that grow or raise all of these things. And that's truly what is so cool to be a farmer and to be able to serve in the capacity of working with the Farm Bureau and working to improve relationships and market opportunities for those that we serve. Now, as I travel the state and country, I get really excited telling the Missouri story, because truly I think we have a wonderful story to tell when it comes to the agriculture of today and even more so the agriculture of tomorrow. We've noted that the St. Louis region is an epicenter for ag tech. In fact, there are more plant science PhDs in the St. Louis region than anywhere else in the world, anchored by Monsanto, now Bayer, Donald Danforth, and all these great assets that make us a powerhouse when it comes to the future of plant science. And then you look on the western side of the state where I'm from, There are more animal health companies in the Kansas City region, which stretches from Manhattan, Kansas to Columbia, Missouri, than anywhere else in the world. And when you think about Missouri being a huge livestock production state, it is really, really neat to have those assets focused right here in the heartland. We're also home to great investments when it comes to research. We cover it from private to public. We're home to 2 land-grant universities, University of Missouri and Columbia, as well as the 1890 institution, Lincoln University in Jefferson City, where our Farm Bureau headquarters is. We're also the new home to USDA's Economic Research Service, as well as the National Institute for Food and Agriculture. Again, couldn't be more proud that those assets were located here in America's heartland, closest to those of us who are raising food, fiber, and fuel. And truly, you know, as I think about the future when it comes to value-added agriculture, we in the state have long had incentives and policies in place to encourage and foster farmers investing their own dollars in ag innovation as well as ag processing. We're seeing that come to fruition again, not just in the renewable fuel space with ethanol and biodiesel that we've done for some time. We're going to have a new soybean crush facility in southeast Missouri, just along the Mississippi River. We will have the nation's most modern large-scale beef processing plant in 2 years here just outside of St. Louis. And those are just 2 examples of the investment that's coming to Missouri, because people see that we have traditional ag production, that we have common sense policies in place that foster economic development and growth. And truly, finally, they see that we've got a workforce, a talented workforce. Our greatest asset and greatest product are our young people. Missouri is actually where the National FFA organization, what used to be the Future Farmers of America, where it was born in 1928. And in fact, just this week in Indianapolis, Indiana, the world's largest ag-focused youth conference is happening right now. And truly, Missouri was where it started. Missouri was where the Farm Bureau started. And I truly believe Missouri is where it's at when you think about the future of ag tech and innovation. Yeah.
Take that, Texas. Maybe sticking with Garrett, give us a sense from the grower and producer perspective. What are the biggest challenges facing agriculture in the state? And I appreciate you have a lot of commodities grown. It's very diverse, much more diverse than most people realize. You have animal, you have crop, you have processors, you have a lot of different interests. But how would you summarize the challenges that growers and producers face?
You know, as a farmer, we expect that we're going to deal with uncertain weather year after year, right? And no 2 years in agriculture are the same when you think about, you know, the climate here in Missouri as well as across the country. And so this year, we've been gripped by drought. Fortunately, we received 3 inches at my farm over the last 24 hours, which is helpful, but a little late in the growing season, at the end of the growing season, but still we need it to replenish water supplies. But truly, we will see the impacts of drought as more harvest numbers come in. So it has been a difficult year for production agriculture. But I'd say truly what is impacting pocketbooks the most, Jim, are policies that are beyond our control coming out of Washington, D.C. You know, a lot of folks may not realize that energy policy is directly tied to food security and our ability to produce food in an affordable fashion. And we are major users of energy, from gas, diesel, electricity, natural gas, you name it. And energy prices being so high this past year and the last couple of years have really impacted profitability on the farm. Fertilizer costs this past spring were double what I paid last year. So really the economic issues that are affecting all American consumers are hitting farmers especially hard, because we are consumers as well when we go to the grocery store, but we're also consumers of inputs that are needed. And virtually every input that we touch is tied to energy. So I would say that, you know, and again, just critical infrastructure, I'd say, is the other issue that's on people's minds. That's why we spend a lot of time here in the state talking about broadband, as well as water or river infrastructure and investments here. We're along the Mississippi River, right, and have that tremendous asset. So from a big picture, farmers are talking a lot about what we need to continue to do to improve infrastructure to reach consumers around the world.
And Saud, Mikal, how would you kind of encapsulate the challenges that your growers, your producers, your agricultural sector is facing? What would be right at the top?
Water. Water supply is 100%. Unlike the U.S., we know what the weather is going to be like. But again, it's high temperatures. It's access to water. A couple of, I think it was a decade ago that we finally were able to work with RTI, Research Triangle Institute, down I think in South Carolina or North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah, North Carolina. Yeah, North Carolina. And we introduced the concept of what the United States calls gray water. We call it treated sewage effluent, cleaning the water and being able to use it for irrigation purposes and as potable water. But yeah, at the top of the list, it has to be the water issues. And you're absolutely right. It's the energy. It's every input has to touch energy at the end of the day. And that is one of the things that we are constantly obsessed with in the UAE, is how to diversify our energy mix away from oil and gas. Hence, you see the introduction of nuclear power, solar panels, even wind, even though we don't have lots of winds in the year, but wind as a fuel saver, right? So we're constantly obsessed with diversifying our energy mix to try to at least weather the shocks in prices of energy prices.
And Mikal, in Israel, what would you rank at the top of grower and producer challenges?
I think it's how to increase yield under climate change. Can give you example from last year, the apple harvest in Israel. So last winter wasn't cold enough. And because of that, we didn't have a high yield of, or normal yield of apples. So we need to find ways how to produce fruits, vegetables when it gets warmer compared to the past. I think that water issue, although we always try to save water in Israel, I think it is being, we have good solutions for that. Again, we still try to save as much as we can because the prices are high. But I think it's having high yields of produce under climate change. And also related to that is, diseases that and pests that we see that are being much more aggressive than they used to be. And, if we relate to, what I presented before of how to do, to practice better agriculture, taking care of the environment, it's a big challenge, to do plant protection in a sustainable manner. So in order to overcome these challenges, we are very much invested in, and it was mentioned, in gene editing in order to bring it. It's not commercial yet in Israel, of course, and we do need to work also on all the regulatory issues, but we do invest in gene editing in order to bring new varieties that will be better for the climate and the climate change on one hand, and on the other hand, to have diversify varieties that we can grow in indoor systems. Because today all over the world, everyone know how to grow lettuce and other greens in indoor and in control environment. But we wish to learn how to grow tomatoes and cucumbers and maybe even apples and oranges in a control environment. And to do it, of course, economically. And so this is also a big challenge that we are investing currently.
So this symposium is about addressing challenges in food security and climate-smart agriculture. Food security has been with us as a major issue, as both from an economic, humanitarian, it's a kitchen table issue, literally. But when we talk about climate-smart agriculture, we're talking intrinsically about changing systems, whether that's incremental or quantum changes. We're talking about change. So let's kind of shift and talk about how change is happening in the different regions. Saud, how receptive is the UEA generally and agriculture specifically? How receptive is that sector of your economy to change? And how does government influence or incentivize change that needs to happen, particularly on the climate smart side of things?
So in the UAE, as I said, we have a young, vibrant, energetic female minister of climate change and food security. She heads the Ministry of Climate Change and Food Security. There are a couple of objectives of that ministry. They develop the plans, the strategies, and the policies related to the environment, agriculture, animal, and fishery, in addition to combating desertification and preserving biodiversity. The ministry is responsible for increasing the contribution of such sectors to the GDP to ensure food security and biosafety in the country through implementation of safety measures and prevention of epidemics and other diseases. Integrate environmental protection and socioeconomic development plans, and promote sustainable use of vital resources. Establish the quality of agriculture, livestock, and fishery production. Establish laboratories and centers for research, and perhaps that is the most needed thing in the UAE today, as well as applied studies to support the objectives of the ministry. And then, as well as propose legislation, things like subsidies that have been given out to a lot of the farmers for seeds, pesticides, the loans that I was speaking about, making sure that there's competitive loans even at a time where interest rates are at all-time high. The ministry also monitors the climate change issues at not just locally, but also on a regional and global level as well, and collaborates with concerned parties. The ministry is responsible for relevant international treaties, and as an example, the latest one that was signed with Israel on exchanging best practices in food production, food distribution, deploying technologies such as I said, the hydroponics and the vertical and smart farming as well. And again, all of this is literally governed at the heart of our national food security strategy and the objectives of what we call the 2051 objectives that the ministry has to deliver on.
Garrett, from the perspective of the grower, and I'm really glad that we do have the firsthand grower perspective on this panel, talk about changes in agriculture from the standpoint of climate smart technologies. And I appreciate that there is very likely, even in this audience, an underappreciation for just how much technology and how much migration has already happened on the farm. But help us understand what the growers are doing today to, say, lower their greenhouse gas footprint or carbon footprint, and the barriers to continuing to change, the barriers and receptivity. Mm-hmm. I realize that's a bunch of questions I threw in there, but really wanting to get your perspective on change on the farm as it relates to climate-smart technologies.
You know, Jim, sometimes when we have these conversations, I think back and have to wonder what it would be like having the conversation with either one of my grandpas today and talking about climate-smart agriculture. You know, growing up, I remember both of my grandfathers talking about living through the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. And my one grandfather, when he was 7, he was behind a 2-horse team and a plow and would end up walking 11 miles a day, turning the soil and helping his family to survive and make a living. And so you see what they lived through, and then ultimately when they passed away about a decade ago, just to see how far agriculture had come. And as a young kid, I just loved hearing the stories about how much farming had changed in all those decades, and even today, how much more we continue to rapidly change. I also remember all the stories, you know, the 1980 drought and how bad it was. And again, these milestones in a farmer's career, you remember these extreme weather patterns. And certainly we as farmers talk a lot about changing weather patterns. Now again, we can debate science and all that, but what we do know is that we in agriculture have to be more resilient. And that's where we within Farm Bureau are focusing, is resilience and innovation, research, technology, and that intersection. So I do want to point out that, you know, when we think about practices on the farm, Missouri has long been a leader in the adoption of what I call common sense conservation. In fact, recognizing in the 1980s that we could do more to save our soil as well as improve water quality, Missouri Farm Bureau, as well as our partners in the conservation sector, asked Missourians to tax ourselves to the tune of 1/10 of a cent for every dollar spent here in the state, half of which goes to state parks and conservation, and half of it goes to soil and water conservation to help farmers through cost share assistance. So since the mid-'80s, we as Missourians have put our own skin in the game, matching that with farmers and ranchers to do more on our farms, to help improve and lessen soil erosion, to improve water quality, and also improve wildlife habitat. So in fact, we in Missouri were climate friendly before climate friendly was the cool thing to do. And so when I think about common sense conservation, that is climate smart. Anything that we are doing that is providing an environmental benefit on the farm as well as to the consumers that we serve each and every day, I believe truly in a broadest sense is climate friendly. So as we approach this conversation from a policy standpoint, the biggest concern that farmers and ranchers have is that we are going to be handed down restrictions and regulations that hamper our ability to be productive and profitable, for which the United States is known. And certainly we are open and receptive to new ideas, to new practices. I'm even working through BioSTL. I will hopefully soon be testing a new technology to improve fresh fodder availability on my farm. Those are the conversations that are happening everywhere, and that's what we want to make sure that we do not stifle. What we want is to incentivize and encourage adoption of technology, encourage adoption of conservation practices that make sense. You know, I can tell you, people look at me, pretty funny sometimes when I talk about Missouri has more farm ponds than any other state in the nation. Farm ponds that traditionally are used to water livestock, right?
More than Texas.
More than Texas.
Yes.
Yes, we are number one in something, farm ponds. Many of those farm ponds were built by the farmers and ranchers themselves. And as you think about just silting and erosion and that happens, think about what would happen if we had a program to better encourage farmers to dig out these ponds, put in place piping and improvements so you can better water your livestock, you can hold more water during these gully washer events, and all of a sudden your farm is a little bit more resilient when we have these extreme rainfalls. Those are the common sense things that farmers want to talk about. They want to be at the table because we are providers of environmental solutions, and by that nature, we want to be part of the conversation. And that's the exciting thing that I hear around the state is look at us as providers of solutions, not as a part of the problem.
Michal, in Israel, what is the bigger factor? Is it the directives from policy, or is it the private sector innovating?
That's a hard question. I think it's a combination, but I just heard that the Israeli farmer may be very similar to the Missouri ones, because we see them as early adapters, as ones that can deal with high risk of working with new technology that they're not fully sure that will actually benefit the work, but they still go for it and do it. And actually, we as a government try to support this this way of working by funding these opportunities, being there with our farmers, with our entrepreneurs, when it comes to collaborate between them in order to test new technologies, in order to have a proof of concept, in order to fine-tune technologies. So this is a program that we are funding together with the Israel Innovation Authority. They are supporting the entrepreneurs, and we are supporting our farmers, and actually it's very successful. I wanted also to point out that of course, as a ministry, we set policy, and we, as the whole world, concerned about food security. So we try, to look at the future and to see what will be our food in the future, and maybe try to invest together with our farmers on those topics. For example, I can give you that we are putting a lot of investment now in the topic of aquaculture and how to bring food from the sea. There are a lot of opportunities there, starting from algae, continue to new varieties of fish and others that we need to learn how to grow in land, in closed systems sustainably, also to save our oceans. And it was mentioned also solar panels. So we are now starting in Israel a huge pilot together with our growers to install solar panels above agriculture. So it's going to be a very big kind of a commercial experiment that we want to have a lot of data from it in order to understand how to do it better. So this is also something that our growers are very much into it. Also, maybe it will support the growth by giving some shade, saving water, maybe less UV on the growth, during the hot hours. And of course, there's also the issue of alternative protein that we are looking more and more into bringing new varieties of different crops with a high percentage of protein, and also how to support the growing industry, this growing industry in Israel, the food tech industry.
On that last point about higher protein crops, I heard an interesting talk a couple of weeks ago. This was at AgTech Next here at the Danforth Center. One of the speakers was making the case that the bad rap, sorry Garrett, that animal-based meat has gotten over the past 10 to 20 years as a significant greenhouse gas emitter through the whole chain, that's changing quite rapidly, and that the differential between crop-based protein and animal-based protein may be narrowing faster than people think. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that,
no,
because I have a feeling what you'd say about that. But how about this? We have a microphone up in the front here, and I want to give anyone in the audience who has a question, please make your way down to the microphone. please make your question brief and no lectures. No lectures.
Yeah, thanks for everybody. So I got a real quick question, and this is for both the constituents that you both represent, the farmers and also in the UAE. How much do your constituents understand and also realize that what we're talking about today don't exist in silos, right? That the agriculture policy affects energy policy, which affects water policy, national security, so on and so forth, right? That it's this kind of circular effect. And so my question is just, what is the level of understanding, what is the responsibility, right, that our populations kind of understand how all these things are connected, if you assume that they're connected?
Population, the average citizen in the UAE, no, we need to work on that, 100%. It's the biggest thing we're facing today, even with one of the biggest problems that we're facing, which is 1/3 of food waste. It's awareness campaigns. It's trying to incentivize people. And from my experiences, yeah, you can do awareness campaigns, you can try to educate, but if you don't introduce an incentive-based system where you actually hurt a consumer's pocket, he's not going to change his behavior.
So can you say a word or two about incentives that you're putting in place or have in place in the UAE?
So they're still working on the incentives to change people's behaviors as it pertains to food waste, okay? But to answer your question from a government perspective, yeah, on a government level, the synchronization between all these different factors that you just mentioned, whether it's national security, energy policy, agricultural policy, you'll see that the UAE is very, very forward thinking from a government perspective. For example, we have an artificial minister of AI. We have a minister of artificial intelligence, not an artificial a minister of AI. We have a minister of youth whose responsible is to go out and see what are some of the grievances between youth, what are things they aspire for. So a lot of the issues we face, we like to institutionalize them in government organizations. So on that level, yeah, we're synced, but the population needs a lot of work for sure.
I was going to say, you're really advanced if you've got an artificial Minister of Artificial Intelligence. That makes me nervous.
We have a Minister of Happiness. I'm still trying to figure that one out, but she's responsible for me being happy. Let's see.
Okay, so real quick, food security is national security, right? And truly, you know, farmers and ranchers understand that. They live it every day. The pandemic served as an important lesson for many Americans who had never walked into a grocery store and for the first time saw empty shelves or pretty bare meat cases. And truly that has been an opportunity for us to reignite conversations with those that we serve about where their food comes from. We already have programs in place to help educate youth, but there are so many adults who literally have never been hungry. Now, from the standpoint of going to the store and seeing shelves empty. And truly, you know, as we think about opportunity, we within Farm Bureau have engaged our members. We have now a meat and poultry directory online where Missourians can go to connect with a farmer so that they can find if they want to buy direct. The state as a whole has invested more in small, what I would call mom and pop meat processing capacity so that we as farmers have more outlets in how we market our livestock, as well as more outlets for local consumers to buy direct. And so those are some things that are happening that unfortunately fortunately resulted from a very unfortunate circumstance. And again, you know, from the standpoint of just hunger in general, we see around the world, and we as farmers are reminded that when a population is hungry, you see unrest. You've seen that with failed policies in Sri Lanka as they move to rapidly move to organic production, and then you look at what happened, hunger as well as unrest and a toppling of the government. So we are always thinking about that and trying to figure out how do we do better, as well as how do we help those in need, those who are hungry, including those who are our neighbors in our own communities.
I'm glad you made that comment about organic, and I'm not here to say anything specific about organic, except to remind the audience the key principles are food security, sustainability, and regeneration. If organic has a role, terrific. If organic is not the same as those things, I think we need to appreciate that, and I'll make that statement. Security, regeneration, and sustainability is not equal to organic. Yeah, another question from the audience.
I'm Jack Meisenbach. I'm from Columbia, Missouri. I would like to ask what the Farm Bureau is doing specifically to support the transition to renewable energy in the state of Missouri. We still get 70% of our energy from burning coal. And we are lagging in the installation of transmission lines, solar, wind, and so forth. And I guess, would the Farm Bureau be willing to step up and help with their members to let us enable the transition to clean energy in the state of Missouri?
Well, I certainly appreciate that question. It's an ongoing conversation within Farm Bureau, and frankly, has been for some time. You know, our policy positions are adopted by our grassroots members, and for some time, our members have said we as a nation should be energy independent first and foremost, and that should come from a diverse portfolio of energy sources, including renewable energy. And for me as a farmer, I've always been excited about opportunities for farmers to help participate in the generation of power. I mean, you see that with renewable fuels and the role that farmers and ranchers play. But truly, as we think about the future, as we think about wind and solar, Missouri is at the crossroads of the nation in many ways for this conversation. I mean, just right now, we have communities that are divided over solar farms and the taking out of ag production and putting into solar energy production, really productive farmland. And that's an ongoing conversation, and frankly is a property rights issue if a farmer wants to enter into that type of production. So truly we see a place for renewable energy, but we also believe that our energy portfolio should be diverse, and we should also recognize that the siting of these new technologies often happens on private land, and more specifically on farmland. And so making sure that we can maintain our productive capabilities, that we can make sure that property rights are respected, those are the things that are on our members' minds as we think about the future. I mean, we truly believe within Farm Bureau that we can have energy security while being respectful of private property rights. And those are the discussions that are happening and will be ongoing. So thank you for the question.
Well, we're out of time. That went quickly. But thank you so much, Mikal. Thank you, Saud. Thank you, Garrett. Thank you not only for being on this panel, but for all the work that you're doing to move agriculture and the agri-food system forward. And finally, thank you, the audience, for not only listening, but you perhaps using your imagination at times, and thank you for the excellent questions.